Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article is speaking about Andhra Pradesh decentralization and inclusive development of all regions repeal bill of 2021. Before we understand what this article is all about, let's have an idea with respect to the background. Up until 2014, what we had was a united Andhra Pradesh. United Andhra Pradesh was also having Telangana within the fold of Andhra Pradesh. There were large scale protests, there were strikes that took place, which is why the central government decided that it has to bifurcate the state of Andhra Pradesh, one into Andhra Pradesh and the other into Telangana. So, what happens post 2014? We had two independent states, one in the form of Telangana, the other in the form of Andhra Pradesh. Every state requires a capital. It is the capital which will have the administrative apparatus. It will also house the legislative wing, the executive wing, the judicial wing, and it will also have number of important administrative apparatus as well. When it comes to the United Andhra Pradesh, what it also had as the capital is the Hyderabad. But once the bifurcation happens, Hyderabad goes into the fold of Telangana. But the state of Andhra Pradesh, which is now bifurcated, becomes a new state, does not have a capital. So what does the government have to do? The government which comes into picture will have to create a new capital for the state of Andhra Pradesh. That is why back in the year 2014, the Telugu Desam party which came into the government forms a new capital in the form of Amaravati. So what does the government decide? That Telangana is currently having the capital of Hyderabad and Andhra Pradesh requires a new capital. So the Telugu Desam party requests multiple people to pool in the land, and they also ensure that about 33,000 acres of agricultural land was pooled in from about 29 villages, and they also promise to provide the monetary compensation to these farmers, and at the same time, because of the development, they will also have prosperity in the near future. So what does the Telugu Desam party do? It creates a capital in Amaravati, which was between Vijayawada and Guntur. But in the year 2019, what we had is the change of government. The change of government was led by YSR Congress. So we have the new chief minister, we have the new government in place, we have a new political party running the affairs of the government. What does it decide? It decides that if there is a single capital, there won't be decentralization process, there won't be development of other districts as well. So what does it do? It proposes a new idea. This idea was the creation of not one single capital or the development of the capital, but instead it says what we will have is three different capital. One will be the legislative capital, the other will be the executive capital, the third will be the judicial capital. So the proposal that was made back in the year 2019 was called as Andhra Pradesh Decentralization and Inclusive Development of All Regions Act of 2020. So the earlier one, the Andhra Pradesh Capital Region Development Authority Act of 2020 was repealed, and what we had was a new proposal where they wanted to develop three different capitals in the state of Andhra Pradesh. So what are these three different capitals? In this particular place, we have Amaravati, which will be the legislative capital. We will have Vishakhapatnam, which will be the executive capital. We will also have Kurnool, which will be the judicial capital. This is the proposal made by the Andhra Pradesh government back in the year 2019. So a single capital would be replaced with multiple capitals in the state of Andhra Pradesh. Now comes the question, what are the advantages of coming up with such a proposal? Why did the government come up with such a proposal? While we already have one single capital which they wanted to work on, which they wanted to create as a super city, which they wanted to bring massive changes in this particular capital, why did the government come up with a new proposal of establishing three capitals in the Andhra Pradesh? That is because of multiple reasons. When you consider the state of Andhra Pradesh, if you are developing the city of Amaravati, yes, people in and around will become prosperous. Why? Because the government is is buying their property. Why? Because there will be infrastructural development. Why? There will be new roads that will come into picture. The entire administrative apparatus will come into picture. So this city of Amaravati as a whole will start developing. That is the intention. But if we have three capitals in Andhra Pradesh, this will lead to decentralization. This means it is not just one capital, one place which will be having all the development, but instead multiple capitals will come into place, and this means overall development of the state of Andhra Pradesh. So what we consider is the northern part will be developed, the southern part will be developed, and we will also have Amaravati which is being developed as well. So three capitals in three different geographical locations will mean that development will be evenly distributed in the state of Andhra Pradesh. So it is not just Amaravati people, it is not just the land which is taken from Amaravati people, but instead, because of the decentralized process, development will happen in the north, south, and the center of Andhra Pradesh, leading to much better infrastructure, development of roads, building up of the administrative apparatus is the first argument why the Andhra Pradesh Chief Minister comes up with this proposal. The second argument put forward by the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh is in reference to the congestion. What happens? More the people in this particular place, more will be the congestion, more will be the traffic. He takes into example cities like Mumbai, cities like Chennai, cities like Bengaluru, where you have huge traffic in that city. So if we have the split capital, the congestion will be reduced. What we will have is development of other cities, and ultimately the congestion and the density will drop, says the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh in the 2019 introduction bill. And finally, if we are speaking about previous recommendations, let's say for example, the Andhra Pradesh government back in the year 2014 appointed one of the committees called as the K. Shivaramakrishnan Committee. According to this particular committee, it was given a particular agenda. The agenda was to identify which city should be part of the capital of the Andhra Pradesh government. According to the proposal made by the Shivaramakrishna Committee, it said there should be a decentralized model and this should not have one mega capital. So the 2014 recommendation clearly said that they should not have one mega capital, but instead they should go with the decentralized approach. Then we have another committee appointed in 2019 which is called as G.N. Rao Committee. This committee also recommends that we should have three capitals. These three capitals will help in decentralization process. This will lead to development of multiple capitals as well as the infrastructure in that particular state. So based on all these arguments, they propose that what we should have is three capitals in the state of Andhra Pradesh. However, it is not going to be easy. It is not going to be effective, says some of the arguments. Why? That is because developing one capital in itself takes a lot of toll, and the cost of building this particular infrastructure is too humongous in itself. This requires a lot of money as well. But if you have to develop three capitals, one to the north, one to the south, and one in the center, it means the entire money will have to be invested by the government. This ultimately means there will be heavy financial burden on the state exchequer, which is already empty because of the bifurcation. If we have to see the distance between Visakhapatnam and Kurnool, it is about 700 kilometer. If we check the distance between Visakhapatnam and Amaravati, it is about 400 kilometer. If we check the distance between Amaravati and Kurnool, it is about 370 kilometer. What if the legislative wing is present in one place, the executive wing is present in another place? How will people commute? What will be the logistic cost? How will they interact with each other is the next major question. So this means that on one side there is a proposal to create three capitals, but there are also issues and concerns for the creation of this capital. Now let's take examples at the global level. We have the example of South Africa. South Africa in fact has three capitals. One, what we have is Pretoria, which happens to be the executive capital. Then what we have is Cape Town, which happens to be the legislative capital, and finally we have Bloemfontein, which happens to be the judicial capital. So in all these cases, what we have is three capitals. So Andhra Pradesh also wanted to adapt similar approach. Let's take the example of Sri Lanka as well. When it comes to Sri Lanka, we have Sri Jayawardenepura, which happens to be the official capital, which happens to be the seat of the national legislature as well. But we also have Colombo, which is the de facto seat for the executive as well as the judicial bodies. So these are some of the examples on the worldwide scale. As part of the assignment, you have to put on the comment section, do we have any examples in the Indian states where we have more than one capital for that particular state? This article in the present context speaks about the government planning to repeal this particular legislation. Why repeal this particular legislation? That is because in 2014 the government had taken lands from the farmers. They were compensated with money as well, and they were also told that there will be development of this particular region. So farmers had given their land. Now if there is development of more than one capital, the city may not develop as per the original intention. So what happens? You have farmers, you have people who have given their land, have filed petitions. They want them to stick to the previous plan, and that is why we have this government which is planning to repeal this particular proposal. Does it mean that the three capital formula will vanish? No. It means that there are some loopholes in the existing law. All these loopholes will be corrected, but the Chief Minister has also clarified that he may retain this very idea of three capitals in the state of Andhra Pradesh. However, there are some existing loopholes in the existing law. These will be changed, amendments will be brought, and the government may also compensate the farmers as well as the landowners, says this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says owning up to criminalization in politics. What is criminalization of politics? Criminalization of politics is nothing but we have criminals who fight the elections, they win the elections, they become members of parliament, they also become members of legislative assembly. This means the lawbreakers who have committed heinous offences, they have violated the laws of the land, they themselves contest the elections and ultimately make the laws for the country. Such is the bizarre nature when it comes to the criminalization of politics. So what happens in this? The lawbreakers themselves make laws for the country people, which is called as criminalization of politics. If we have to look into the statistics, in 2004, about 24% of the members of the parliament had criminal cases pending against them. This increased in 2009, it went up to 30%. It further increased in 2014, it went up to 34%. And in the year 2019, we have as many as 43% of the MPs who had criminal cases pending against them. So what do you see? We constantly see the number of criminals becoming the members of the parliament. Now the question is, why is criminalization of politics increasing over the years? Why do individuals who have criminal background take a plunge into the politics? That is because of two reasons. One is what is called as the supply side. The other is what is called as the demand side. This is nowhere to do with economics. This is more about political analysis. What is the supply side? When we speak about politics, politics is a costly affair. Why? Because if people have to contest the elections, they become a candidate in a particular constituency, they have to meet the people, they have to go interact with the people, they require an agenda, they require pamphlets, they require booth level workers. All these people will have to be paid, and at the same time people also ask money from these politicians, and at the same time if there are festivals, these politicians will also have to fund these festivals as well. So what happens is it requires a lot of money to contest in an election, and this is a constant process, continuous process when it comes to the elections in India. When you consider number of political parties before 1970, it was comparatively less, but after after 1970, where you also see the coming together of multiple political parties, what you also see is competition. Competition means there is more supply of the political parties. If there are more political parties, it also means more money has to be spent. So if there is more money, that is when that political party, that political candidate would be able to win the elections. This is where criminality or criminals enter into the fold. Why? Because these criminals have got ill-gotten money. This they might have got because of an illegal act, or because of extortion, or through any other illegal means. Because they have this illegal money, they are able to spend in the system, and that is how they are able to win the elections. And for the political parties, it is all about winnability of the candidate, which is why the criminals enter into the fold of politics, because of the competition, and also because it's a costly affair. Because these criminals have the money, they directly take a plunge into the politics, and ultimately the lawbreakers become the lawmakers in themselves. Added to this, you might also ask the question, if these lawbreakers become the lawmakers, why is that the people are not taking them seriously? Why is that the people are not questioning them? We speak about transparency, accountability, and huge words in itself, and we also say that we do not want the criminalization of politics, but it is the people who feed such criminals. How? That is where the demand side comes into picture. Ideally, we the voters should keep all these political parties under check. We also have to reject these crooks as well. But unfortunately, because we accept money from them, because we accept such corruption related criminals, they are in existence, and the criminalization of politics is also increasing. There were a number of studies that were done in the remote and the rural areas. For them, it does not matter whether the person has merit, whether he is really worthy candidate or not. All that they want is whether he is paying the money, whether he is getting their work done, and they also do not question the credibility of this political candidate as well. All that they want is money on a timely basis, redistribution, and dispute resolution on a timely basis. If the voters in the political system have been able to get this, they are the criminals who are winning in such areas as well. So, on one side, political parties want money, they want the winnability of the candidate. On the other side, you have the voters who just speak but are accepting money from these criminals. This is leading to the perpetuation of these criminals in the Indian politics, and ultimately what we have is criminalization of politics. So what is the biggest casualty to this? Because we have all these criminals entering into the parliament, it is the governance which will take a major hit. It is the governance which will take a major hit, and ultimately the casualty will be the country as well as the democracy. And this ultimately means that more money power means it is making a mockery of the election outcomes in India. In fact, we also had the second Administrative Reforms Commission, which also said that there are also criminals who are entering into the fold of politics because they have a lot number of cases, because they also have police officers who haunt them every now and then. But because they enter the legislative beds, these police officers will not haunt them. And the second Administrative Reforms Commission said that because they want to influence these police officers, they enter into the fold of politics. That is why the transparency and accountability which we always seek does not work, says this article. What are the measures taken by the Election Commission to overcome the criminalization of politics? In the past, we have the Election Commission, which has made sure that there is effective implementation of the Model Code of Conduct, and it has also established the expense monitoring cell so that the money that is illegally spent is always kept a check by the Election Commission. In fact, we have the Election Commission of India, which has also asked these political candidates to declare the assets that they own, the assets of their spouses, and they've also asked these people to show the criminal charges on the self-sworn affidavits as well. Further, we have the Supreme Court of India, which has also taken number of steps in the past. Lily Thomas versus Union of India is one of the landmark judgments where an MP or an MLA who is convicted is disqualified immediately. Then we have the Chief Election Commissioner versus Jan Chowkidar, one of the other landmark judgments which barred those people in jail from contesting the elections. It has also directed the Election Commission to bring the issue of freebies under the ambit of Code of Conduct. It has also asked trial courts to ensure that whenever there is a case involving the legislator, it is completed within 1 year. It has also asked the government to establish special courts as well. In spite of all these judgments that the Supreme Court has taken up, in spite of all these concerns voiced by the Election Commission of India, we have criminalization of politics, which continues to be a major menace for the governance in the country. That is why we had the Supreme Court of India, which also delivered an order back in the year 2020, which said that if political parties are asking a candidate to contest in one of the constituencies and he happens to have a criminal background, the political party should answer why such a person was given that particular candidature. The party should also put on its website and on the social media as well as publish in the newspaper the names and details of such candidates. However, none of these are working, and that's the major problem for the criminalization of politics issue. So what are the major challenges? Lack of enforcement of laws and judgments. What would be the penalty? The contempt of court proceedings has not been taken up by the Supreme Court of India if the government is violating these conditions, and all it means that it is us who have to reform ourselves. We should not accept the bribe or the so-called money given by these people, and ultimately it is our responsibility to bring changes to the political system, is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says the democratic backsliding of India. The article here is speaking about one of the important reports called as Global State of Democracy 2021 report. This is a report which is released by a Swedish think tank called as International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. What does it do? This particular institution or the NGO basically tries to identify what are the threats to the democracy, what should happen in the near future, and also gives recommendation so that the policy makers and the government would be able to adapt it. So remember, the Global State of Democracy report is one of the report released by this institution called as International IDEA. When it comes to this report, this is being released from the year 2016. So the first time it was released was back in the year 2016. It tries to identify the democratic trends and challenges, opportunities impacting the global democracy. It tries to collect evidence from multiple countries, gives the data to the people who are in power, and ultimately the government should be able to reform after the data is provided by this think tank. So this aims to contribute to the public debate on democracy and ultimately inform policy makers to strengthen the democracy. How does it work? What does it base its argument on? There are 5 principles where it bases its argument on. 1. It speaks about the fundamental rights, checks on the government, impartial administration, participatory engagement, and finally representative government. So what does representative government include? It includes clean elections, it includes inclusive suffrage, it includes free political parties, it also includes elected government. If they have all this in picture, then a ranking would be provided as part of representative government. Then we have the fundamental rights. This includes the access to justice, civil liberties, social rights, and equality. If the state is not tyrannical in itself, it is not dictatorial in nature, and it is providing these rights, that is when that means the fundamental rights are accorded to the citizens of that country. Then we have the checks on the government, which is in the form of effective parliament, judicial independence, and media integrity. If these are all in place, there are suitable checks on the government, says this particular report. Then we have impartial administration, which is about predictable enforcement. It is about absence of corruption. It is not only about laws, it is about execution of the laws, irrespective of who is implementing it, on whom it is being implemented. That is what is taken into picture. So the predictable enforcement, and then if there is work to be done from the government perspective, people need not have to bribe the government officials, so there has to be absence of the corruption as well. Finally, what we have is participatory engagement, where we have the people becoming part of the process. This includes local democracy, direct democracy, electoral participation, and civil society participation. If people are becoming part of this particular process, they have equal contribution when it comes to policy making. Based on all these aspects that we just discussed, regimes will be classified as democracies, hybrid, and authoritarian regime. So what are the findings of the report? What are the highlights as given under this report? According to them, between 2016 and 2020, the number of countries that have moved towards authoritarianism has been steadily increasing and outnumbering the number of countries that have seen democratic gains. If we have to consider two countries, one moving towards authoritarianism, the other continuing with the very principle of democracy, more countries are moving towards authoritarian regime, says this article. Since the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, democratic backsliding has accelerated. So what is this democratic backsliding? This is one of the pictures of democracy where equality is not being given to the citizens of the country. There are no checks on the government and the civil liberties. Freedom of expression, freedom of association, and assembly are not taken into picture. In fact, people are arrested, put behind bars as well. The freedom of expression is not respected. So this is often the intentional policies and reforms and policies and laws brought by the government to weaken the rule of law in that particular country. So what is democratic backsliding? On one side, the rights that should have been given to the citizens are not given. At the other side, you also have laws and reforms being introduced by the government so that it takes away rule of law in that particular country. So it says during COVID-19, what we had is major democracies entering into the fold of democratic backsliding where rule of law was not respected in that particular country. The report also notes 70% of the global population now live either in non-democratic regimes or in democratically backsliding countries. So what are these non-democratic regimes? The hybrid and the authoritarian regimes together are called as the non-democratic regimes. With respect to India, it has classified India as the backsliding countries. There are other countries like Brazil and United States of America who are also part of the backsliding countries. So this means that there have been some laws which may have been introduced in India which has taken away rule of law. It has taken away the freedom of expression of the people, which is why it is being categorized as democratic backsliding. What are the reasons for the decline? When we see the reasons for the decline of India and multiple other countries, it can be because of illiberal and populist policies. It can be because of the societal and political polarization. It can be because of the economic crisis that is unfolding in that country. It can be because of the disinformation, freedom of expression being curbed as well. All this has ultimately led to these countries not witnessing the true meaning of democracy. So what are the implications of this? The minute there is decline of democratic values in a country, there will be activism in that particular country. People will take up arms against that particular country. There will be a lot of strikes and protests in that particular country, and ultimately clean elections will be a major casualty when there is democracy that is threatened, says this particular report. So what should be the way forward? What should be the recommendation? According to this particular NGO, it asks the government the civil society, multilateral institutions, private sector people all form an alliance together so that they are able to protect and advance democracy in their country. They have to reassert important rights in their country, and going forward, they should deliver important services to the citizens, which should be based on consensus and not on the basis of imposition, says this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says the uncertainty around cryptocurrency. There is another article which says, is the crypto asset boom sustainable? The article here is speaking about the cryptocurrency and regulation of official digital currency bill 2021, which the government is planning to introduce in the winter session. What is this bill all about? What will be the provisions of this bill? We are not sure about this bill. Why? Because the government is yet to notify it. It is yet to come in the public forum. But once we have that particular legislation in the public forum, we will have an elaborate discussion. But our point of discussion today is, what is the government planning to come up with? One, it is planning to come up with the creation of an official digital currency. So this official digital currency may be regulated by the Reserve Bank of India. So this will be a state-led cryptocurrency where the government may have control in this. We might also have a regulatory body like RBI, or in fact the Reserve Bank of India may regulate this cryptocurrency. So this is what is being thought of when it comes to this bill. Added to this, the bill may also prohibit all private cryptocurrencies in India. What is this private cryptocurrencies? There are multiple definitions to it. One, they say that those cryptocurrencies which are not created by the state, by another country, is not a private cryptocurrency. It also means that if the transactions made under the cryptocurrencies are not made public, such is also called as the private cryptocurrency. So we do not have a clear-cut definition. Why? Because the government hasn't revealed it in the public forum. So what this means is that one, it has to be a cryptocurrency created by one of the countries, and all the transactions should be out in the public forum. If they are not in the public forum, if they are not regulated by another country, such cryptocurrencies may be barred. However, this is not the complete definition. The complete definition can happen only when the details are released by the government of the country. How are the regulations in multiple other countries? When we look into multiple countries, you have one of the examples that we can pick up. We have one of the countries called as El Salvador. What does it do? It has given permission to all these cryptocurrencies. So it means there are countries which have started accepting Bitcoin or the cryptocurrencies as a legal tender. Then we also have China as well. China has banned it completely. But where does India stand? India is one of those countries which is planning to regulate. So we are somewhere in the mid-level. So we are not going to completely ban it, or we are not going to give license for all the cryptocurrencies to operate in itself in the name of cryptocurrencies. So what we will have is a regulation. So this article currently goes on to say that in the near future, if India is planning to come up with a cryptocurrency, we need to have a regulator. We have the Reserve Bank of India. We also have SEBI when it comes to the stock market as well. So similar such institution should be established. Why should we have a regulation? That is because there are some advantages when it comes to cryptocurrency. If you have to speak about the inflation, gold is giving you one of the returns, but the cryptocurrencies are much better hedge against the inflation, which is one of the advantages. When we speak about cryptocurrencies, it is about the evolution of technology. So if we are completely banning the cryptocurrencies, it means we are not respecting the revolution of the technology. We have to accept this revolution. However, go about regulating it is the second objective. And finally, it will also have beneficial effect in disciplining the central bank as well. Let's take the example of Zimbabwe. What happened? Because Zimbabwe did not have proper monetary advantages, monetary regulations, it was printing money continuously, so it lost the value as well. But if you have a competition in a form of a cryptocurrency, then people will start using the cryptocurrencies. So the central bank will also start becoming very cautious about its printing process as well. So if you have multiple options, the central bank will also be cautious. So what we need to have is a cryptocurrency in place, but we need to regulate it, says this article. If it is completely banned, what it may also see is it may go underground as well. If it goes underground, the government will be the major sufferer. If we are regulating it, the government would be able to impose taxes. These taxes can be used for the welfare schemes and programs. If it goes underground, the government would be not be able to impose the taxes, and it is the government which is the major sufferer, says this article. So going by all these arguments, this article goes on to say that the government should regulate instead of banning it, says this article. However, we will take up this article in an elaborate way once we see the provisions of this legislation. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. Will the idea of designating three capitals for the state promote distributed development? Critically examine. Next question. The rising tide of criminalization in Indian politics threatens the survival of true democracy. Discuss. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review. Do give positive feedback to your friends' answers. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.